Hello again, you sick, twisted weather freaks, and welcome to another fun-filled, action-packed, and intellectually stimulating edition of This Week in Weather. I'm your host and meteorologist, DT, from WX Risk here in Central Virginia, the commander of chaos, the captain of confusion, the colonel of catastrophe. Let's talk about this week in weather. And with this week, see, it's obviously my main topic here this week is going to be the hurricane season 2020. I mean, that's really what we're looking at here. But we'll do a few other things, but most would look at that because I think there's some interesting trends developing here. So, first, in case you don't know who I am or what I'm doing here or why I'm bothering you, there's a picture of my smiling face from outside of Richmond, Virginia. And you can see my email there at Verizon. And then also there is the Twitter account for operational weather here in the East Coast, and then of course the Facebook page. So let's get right to it, and we'll start by taking a look at recent conditions, and then we'll go from there. So here we'll take a look at the temperatures over the last 7 days across the U.S., and you can see that except for the lower mid Atlantic, from New Jersey down into the Carolinas and Georgia, much of the eastern half of the country has turned warm. Now, of course, we did have that upper low, which is one of the reasons why Virginia, as you see, has over the last 7 days been below normal temperatures. North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, much of Georgia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York City, that sort of thing. But outside of that upper low, which lingered over for the East Coast, Mid Atlantic for several days, most of the eastern half of the country has in fact seen a warmer pattern, and the Rockies have in fact cooled down. The Canadian prairies, the west coast. Look at the rainfall of the past 7 days. You can see pretty good rains in a lot of areas. I mean, again, the upper low, well above normal here. Now, notice in eastern Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, the rainfall in New England was not significant, but there was a lot of rain in the southeast states again over the past 7 days, and over the plains from Texas up into Nebraska, Iowa, portions of western Missouri, Arkansas, that sort of thing. And one of the reasons for that, as we can see here, this next image is the upper air map. This is valid as of May 20th. And we can see the upper low very clearly here, which is what the problem was, underneath the huge ridge. So there was the upper low here, and this here was the ridge over it. So this is what's known as a classic Rex block situation, when the upper low is underneath the big ridge here. And it was a slow-moving system, lasted for several days, brought a lot of rain and cloud conditions, and of course very cool temperatures in the Middle Atlantic, which is why we had that very impressive temperature disparity. Of course, to the north, we had the ridge, and that's why your temperatures were, of course, very warm, like we saw here. So that's what. Now, again, the other thing to point out here is notice the change going on the West Coast. We're now getting these big troughs crashing in from the Eastern Pacific into the West Coast, and that's a change. That's not what we have been seeing in this cold pattern since about April 1st or April 5th. We've had a persistent ridge on the West Coast. We're no longer seeing that. So that's kind of a change in the pattern here. And we can see that this is as of May 28th here. Yeah, I believe it is. This is valid, yeah, for May 26th, excuse me, May 26th. We can see the big ridge here over the East Coast, where we had some warm weather temperatures. In the Midwest, we got to near 90 degrees in many places west of the Appalachians this past weekend. And then, of course, here's our big trough here, trying to pound its way against the ridge, and it's not making a lot of progress. So you're getting a lot of rain in the Delta up into the Mississippi Valley. You know, the rain's doing this sort of thing, coming up right along the boundary here. Now, of course, what's happened is that this upper low has now separated itself from the main flow, but that's where we are right now. Now, what happens is this is, of course, valid here for Wednesday. We can see the upper low over Texas, the big ridge on the East Coast, and we have our little tropical disturbance, which became Bertha right here. So we're getting a southeast flow bringing up the moisture. So even though we have a nice ridge here, it's bringing up the moisture up the Appalachians into Virginia, into western Pennsylvania, Maryland, and then you have the upper low here, and then more systems coming in to the west coast again. So the pattern on the west coast has changed. As we go further out in time here. Now, this is the European model here for Saturday, and then again for Monday. And we get a big trough coming into the Midwest here, and then the East Coast. There's the trough coming in. Bit of a ridge here that forms again, but it's not on the West Coast. It's on the Rockies. We get these two pieces of energy phase into one big trough, so you get a big ridge here, and that allows this trough to come in and we have a nice strong cold front moving through this way. And there's the trough here now on Monday off the coast, very deep for June, but it's moving off the coast out to sea. And here comes the next big trough coming into the eastern Pacific Ocean. So the ridge now forms here over the Rockies and the upper Midwest here to some degree. Now, once this trough moves out of the way, this ridge is going to expand into the East Coast, and we will turn hot and dry, I believe. And we can see that here. Now, this is the European ensemble valid for June 2nd, 150 hours. You can see we have two troughs, one on the eastern Pacific, one over New England. Now, we do have some cool air still over the East Coast because obviously if we have a big low here, we have a cold front like this, so we're going to have flow coming out of Canada. But as soon as you get west of the Appalachians, look at this big heat ridge developing here. A little bit of a dome there, folks. So very impressive warmth coming to the plains of the Midwest. And eventually, when that gets out of the way on the east over New England, that when this trough gets out of the way, this will come eastward a little bit. And we can see, again, another big trough on the eastern Pacific. And of course, we'll talk about why that's important in just 1 second. And then finally, here we take a look at what happens at June 7th and June 11th, and we can see the ridge is now over the eastern United States into the Midwest. The trough has moved away, and look at the new troughs here over the Pacific, eastern Pacific coming down, causing more upwelling in the eastern Pacific here and again in here. So not a super hot pattern, but certainly a warmer and drier one anticipated with the overall pattern here as we go into the first 10, 15 days of June. Again, not a record-breaking warm pattern at all, but certainly a warmer, drier pattern. Now, let's take a look at the hurricane season. We'll talk what's going on here. So this was what the things look like. This is how the sea surface temperatures looked on April 1st. And we can see very clear bunch of cold water in the eastern Pacific, which I've highlighted there. That's a negative PDO, and which favors a negative PNA. That is to say, a trough on the west coast, and then a ridge over the eastern United States. That's what it looked like on April 1st. Everyone see that. That's the image on the left-hand side. Now, on the right-hand side, this is May 26th. Things look vastly different. Look at the warm water in the eastern Pacific. Okay, that is now a positive PDO, the exact opposite of a negative PDO, and of course a positive PNA. Now look at the Atlantic. Look how it's cooled down significantly in the northern Atlantic. That's no longer a positive AMO. That's either neutral or negative AMO, Atlantic oscillation. So that's a totally different change. Now, obviously, this has implications for the hurricane season. First, if we end up getting a big ridge on the west coast, you're going to get a trough of the eastern United States, which means that your hurricane is going to be more likely to turn out to sea. And you're going to get more upwelling, which means ocean water temperatures won't be as warm as they could be. So that's the implication of that if that holds. If that holds. Okay. Next, we can see this in a bit more detail here. Again, AMO, this is the AMO on mid-April, April 21st. You can see how warm the Atlantic is, the Gulf of Mexico, the tropical Atlantic is, the central Atlantic, and then look at the change April 26th. Now, what happened here? Well, there were a couple of the systems which developed. First, this was the overall pattern. This was April 19th. Remember this monster trough that came in? We had the early. This caused a major frost here in the vineyards of North Carolina, Virginia, western and central Maryland, central Virginia. Big ridge on the west coast. You see the ridge on the west coast? This is the left-hand side image, right? Now the right-hand side, that's June 1st, what the anticipated pattern is going to be. We have another trough on the east coast, but look at the ridge developing in the eastern Atlantic Ocean. See that ridge developing there? That's going to mean less storminess, more dry weather, or less active weather, potentially warming temperatures. Also, look at the energy coming into the Pacific Ocean. I talked about this just a few slides earlier. You see the energy coming in here? Okay, that's going to cause upwelling in the eastern Pacific Ocean. All the water temperatures here are going to start dropping as we're getting these systems crashing in to the west coast now. So the water temperatures are going to start dropping significantly. So that means that the warm water in the eastern Pacific is going to fade away, I believe, over time. In the Atlantic Ocean, we can see, again, the pattern early April on the left-hand side. This was You can see that we had constant trough here on the west coast, a big ridge, and a constant trough in the central Atlantic Ocean, big ridge over Western Europe where it's been warm and dry in France and England, and then the big persistent trough across the Ukraine and Western Russia. Now what's happened here the first week of June, we get a big ridge which forms in the central Atlantic Ocean, which allows the temperatures to warm up, a lot less storminess, and a different weather pattern for Europe. And we can see how this has happened. This is the surface map here for I believe this is May 13th, 14th. So we can see this big, large, low pressure area stalled in the North Atlantic Ocean for several days in a row, causing a lot of upwelling. This is a large system here we can see on May 13th, 14th on the left-hand side, May 19th, 20th. It hasn't moved. It's still there. A very large circulation causing a lot of upwelling with the ocean water temperatures in the Central Atlantic Ocean, which is why the water temperatures here have dropped on the left hand side. You can see that we've had this now since the middle of April, and this is just a class. This is from mid-May, but we had one in mid-April too, the same sort of thing. And then you can see finally we had a big low forming here on May 22nd. Actually developed an eye as it approached Ireland, a huge extratropical low, also again causing a lot of upwelling in the central and North Atlantic with the water temperatures, and we can see the effect of it here. This is the sea surface temperature. Now, this is the latest trend over the last 7 days. Notice in the eastern Pacific here, notice how the temperatures are beginning to drop again right along here. So that would imply that the water temperatures are cooling off here. We're getting these troughs and storms moving into the eastern Pacific and the west coast with the pattern change, which means that the possibility of a sustained positive PDO is going away, and it's going back either to neutral or negative PDO. That's the hope here. That's what I'm seeing in the trend. The Atlantic Ocean, we're beginning to see some warming develop again in some places, so we'll see what happens there over the next couple of weeks and whether in fact that changes. So that's what's going on here. Again, these storms have caused the upwelling in the Atlantic Ocean. I believe they're temporary aberrations. And I think, with this new pattern coming up here, I think we're going to see the ocean water temperatures begin to warm up a little bit in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, obviously this was Arthur here back in the middle of May, and then this is Bertha of yesterday moving inland. So we've had two tropical systems before June 1st. When was the last time that happened? Two named tropical systems before June 1st. 1887, 1908, 1951, and of course the historic hurricane season of 2012. So we can take a look at that briefly just to see what, if anything, we can notice with this, if there's any commonality in these systems. This was 1887. Notice, of course, the data here is always a little sketchy before 1900 or so. But clearly there was a lot of activity over the southeastern U.S., the southwest Atlantic Ocean specifically, right in this area here. You can see a lot of activity. So that's kind of similar to what we're seeing so far with this hurricane season. And this is here for 1908. Again, notice a lot of activity right along Florida and the southwest Atlantic Ocean, the Bahamas. See the cluster activity there? And again, this is very early data, so there could be a lot of data out in the Atlantic Ocean we don't know anything about, because this is 1887, 1908. Now 1951, we have a lot more data here, and notice we had a lot of activity that was curving out in the Atlantic Ocean, a little bit on the Bahamas, but not much. Nothing hitting the east coast or the Gulf of Mexico. A little system through Florida. A lot of activity was a miss. And then 2012. Again, why all that we had? Obviously, we had Sandy, which was the big system, but outside of that, there was a lot of activity in the Central and Atlantic Ocean, which didn't affect a lot of people. So Sandy stands out, but that was pretty much the lone exception there. Sandy. Okay. Now, just a reminder, here in 1981 to 2000, the average is about 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes, and the accumulated cyclone energy, the ACE, about 106. Now, the 2019 season, again, just to refresh your memory, we had 18 named storms, which is a lot, 6 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes, and the AC was about 130. So that was pretty good. Now, August was quiet. Now, a lot of people said, a lot of hurricane fans, weather hobbyists, weather weenies were complaining that the hurricane forecasts were going to bust because August was so quiet. But then September became very active. So did October, with a very warm pattern in October hemispherically, and we ended up getting a lot of activity. But the ACE was a little below normal, and the reason for that was because while we had a very active season, we had 7 named storms. Look at this here. We had 24-hour storms or less. We had 7 of them. 7 storms lasted 24 hours or less, which was the most on record. So obviously the big storm was Durian, which devastated the Bahamas last year. You remember that? 60 fatalities, a lot of damage, and then also along the southeast U.S. coast. Okay. This is a good website. I thought you should know about it, from Colorado State. You can Google the site of hurricane predictions, and we'll show you all the hurricane predictions going around. Now, this is an average of a lot of them, but when you go to the site and you click on here where it says seasonal information, and you can see that here, you'll see a listing of the different forecasts. So this, for example, let me call it up. There you go. So this is various forecasts for May and June. As you can see, notice the companies at the bottom. You can see all the companies at the bottom, which is really, really cool. Weather Bale, AccuWeather, Weather Tiger, what have you, the European, the British, TSR, and North Carolina State, all these different companies, DTN, Earth Networks, the UK Met Office, WeatherWorks. You can see the difference. So this is all for here named hurricanes. So you can see the average is about 8, but notice there are some people which were 12, 12, so on and so forth. Generally, as you can see, there's the line. So everybody's going for above normal activity. Okay, that's named hurricanes, and then this is named storms overall. And again, you can see the different forecasts and the tendencies way above normal. Almost all of them. Oh, nobody really has below normal activity for named storm or hurricane days. Or named hurricanes or named storms. You can see that nobody really is below normal. And this here is major hurricanes. And again, almost everybody's above normal throughout the forecasts. And then again, this is intense hurricanes, or ACE, I should say, Atlantic Cyclone Energy. And you can see everybody's way normal. So some of them are really spiked up here. But again, so I think this is very nice to see. It's a good summary of where all the trends are going. And if you want to do the wisdom of the crowds thing, well, there you go. It's a pretty nasty looking hurricane season coming up. Now, this shows the weekly sea surface temperatures, anomalies from April up into the May 20th. And you can generally see, and if you look in April, everything was really quite warm. Again, we're looking at the right-hand side here on this image here. And you can see that April here was quite warm, as you can see in April 29th. Now, it did cool down with that energy, but now it's beginning to come back a little bit. So again, that supports the trend that things are working out. The other thing is Africa. Let's take a look at the rainfall in Africa. I know a lot of people don't do that. They don't know. They look for it, but they don't know where to find the information. You can get it here from CPC. And what's important here is this is the last 30 days. Actually, since May 1st, it's almost the last 30 days. And again, this is anomaly. So in the upper left, so look at the anomalies here in Southwest Africa, way above normal. 150, 250, 350% above normal for the month of May rainfall. That's pretty impressive. This is the actual rainfall here, but you can see it's quite wet. A lot of areas getting 300 millimeters of rain. That's 12 inches of rain since May 1st. Other areas 150 to 250 millimeters, which is 6 up to 10 inches of rain. So a lot of rain there in Southwest Africa, and that's way above normal. That's important because dry Southwest Africa means a lot of big active systems coming out of Africa, already well organized, a lot of rain, and the potential for an active Cape Verde hurricane season. And the forecast from CPC shows this as well. You can see that this is May into end of June. This is the forecast based upon the current data and the trends. You can see they clearly favor above normal here in Southwest Africa. There you go. And again, this is May 1st through June 30th based upon current trends out to May 26th. So Impressive data and important to talk about. And of course, even the European model here is showing some sort of tropical depression, as is the GFS actually showing a couple of hurricanes again, which is probably way overdone here. But the European ensembles clearly show some sort of system in the Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche here during the first couple of days of June. And like I said, the GFS ensemble is also showing that. So now I want to talk about something which I think is really important. It's something that I like to look at. It's something I push frequently. It's called the first tropical cyclone of the season rule. So the first tropical cyclone of the season rule is one of these old-time rules that tropical forecasters use before the extended models and monthly and seasonal forecasting. Basically, the rule states that the first tropical cyclone of the season, whether it's a tropical storm or hurricane, will give an indication of where there's going to be a cluster activity for the upcoming hurricane season. Okay, so now that being said, the first tropical cyclone of the season rule does not say and does not mean to imply there will be no other activity anyplace else in the Atlantic basin. This is just talking about where there's likely going to be a significant cluster of activity in a particular area. So it kind of gives you a heads up. So, now I first came across the rule back in the 2004 hurricane season. Now, you may remember this one here. This was the hurricane season 2004, where it had 4 hurricanes hitting Florida in 45 days, right? So very unusual activity there in Florida. But if you look at the first named storm in 2004, there's Abby hitting Florida. Okay, just a coincidence. Southeast Florida going up into Georgia, into the southeastern states, which again, a lot of these storms that hit Florida did track up into the southeastern states as big rainstorms or weakened hurricanes or tropical storms. So it wasn't just Florida, it was also Florida and into the interior southeastern U.S. So again, 2004, like I said, this was the first system. There you go. There's Alex 2004 hurricane season. So boom, boom, indication. Okay, now this is 1968. This was Abby in 1968. So you can see here that again, notice where the activity was up into Florida, and then if we look at the 1968 hurricane season, there you go. Look at all the activity in and around Florida. See this? Look at all that activity. Is it a coincidence? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be, if you ask me. This is 1966 hurricane season. This is Alma, the first one. Okay, it's very typical of June in the western Caribbean, going up into the Gulf of Mexico, near Florida, cutting across Georgia, and then off the southeast U.S. coast. This is a fairly common track for early June. That's not unusual. But what is unusual is that the 1966 hurricane season, excuse me, wait a second. Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm looking for. Make sure I get this map. So they're jumping out of place here. That's 66, Alma, and then this is the season. Again, activity in and around Florida. Kind of a match. This was the 1996 hurricane season. Now, a lot of people remember this in North Carolina and Southeast Virginia. This was a big hurricane season. This was the first one of the season, Arthur. Look where it formed. Bahamas, Hatteras, turned out to sea. Bahamas, Hatteras, turned out to sea. What happened in 1996 hurricane season? Look at all the activity in North Carolina. Are you kidding me? Okay, this was a super busy hurricane season for North Carolina, Southeast Virginia, the Delmarva, and look at all the activity. Foretold by Arthur. And not a coincidence. It's not. And again, doesn't mean that's the only place it's going to get hit. It just means you'll likely see a lot of activity in that area. That's all the rule means, but I think it's an important rule. Okay, that was 19. Jumped up here. This is 2005. Now we all remember the 2005 hurricane season. Danny, Emily, Katrina, Wilma, Rita. Okay, the first time ever the Gulf of Mexico saw all Category 4 or 5 hurricanes in one season. 5 of them in one season. There's Arlene, first one of the season, Gulf of Mexico. Well, look how Rita, Katrina, Dan, they all hit the same area, Central Gulf Coast. I mean, I don't know. It's there you go. There's the activity. You can clearly see it. Again, now notice This is a good map to show you a lot of stuff. There's activity down here, and there's a lot of out to sea activity. But look at the activity in the central Gulf of Mexico. Was it foretold by Arthur? Excuse me, by Arlene in 2005? You tell me. I think it was. I think it was. I think there's something to it. This is the 2010 hurricane season. Yucatan, okay, late June, July in the western Gulf of Mexico. Look at all the activity in 2010. So, if that's true, if that rule is true, we don't know that it is, but if this theory is true, if the first tropical cyclone rule is true, then the southeastern U.S. has a problem. It means it's going to be an active hurricane season. That's what that means. Now, on top of that, we have a potentially return to a positive AMO. We have a La Nina developing, which also favors a hurricane season. But this early season activity in Arthur and Bertha seems to favor a lot of activity with the Bahamas, off the coast of Florida, the southeastern U.S. I'd be worried. I think it's going to be an active hurricane season. That everyone agrees with. And if I had to pick an area, that's where I would pick. So that's how I see the hurricane season. Now, I don't do probabilities of, there's 55% chance of this area being hit. I don't do that because that's bullshit. You don't know what areas are going to be hit until you get to the heart of the hurricane season, August, September, and October, and you see how the large-scale teleconnections and global patterns set up. So this idea that you can forecast, say there's a 55% chance, a 62% chance of Florida being hit, that's all bullshit. None of that works. I don't know why people do that. I mean, I know Dr. Gray was doing it a long time, in his early years, and I guess other people are still doing it, but I don't think that works. Anyway, that's how I see the hurricane season. Very active, impressively so, and a real concern here for the southeastern U.S. For this hurricane season. This is meteorologist DT from Weather Risk. I'll see you on the Facebook page and on the Twitter page.